When we get to the game store, will you tell me the names of all the cards in your deck, so when I see them on the battlefield, I know all those fellas?
Okay, well, strange as it may seem, they give cards today very peculiar names.
Do they now?
Yes, they do.
Not as funny as my name, Sebastian Dimwitty.
Oh, yes.
Funnier than that?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Now, in my deck, going up the curve, we've got Savannah Lions on 1, then Fascination on 2, then 6 on 3.
What's on 3?
6 is on 3.
6 what?
On 3.
No. I want to know what creature you're playing on 3 mana.
6.
I thought you cast a 3-drop on 3.
No, Thoughtcast costs 5.
What are you talking about?
I mean, at least technically.
I feel like you're 3 steps ahead of me.
3 steps ahead can be on 3, 4, 5, 6, or even 8.
What are these mind games?
Well, mind games is just 1 or 4.
Forget about 1 and 4. What about 3?
6 is on 3.
What is this Fascination on 6?
I told you, Fascination is on 2.
Why are you giving me so much grief?
Well, grief is on 4, or 0, at least until it gets banned.
You know what? I give up. Farewell.
What'd you just say?
Farewell.
Now that's our 6-drop.
Yeah, I'm recording now.
Cool. I'm also recording you on my side, so I have that as a backup. Anthony is just here, so we're good to go. I'm here. In that case, we can start this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Hello, my name is Andy. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm here, as always, with my other co-host, Anthony, not a pool boy Maddox.
Not so much.
I've been going to the pool every day this summer. I'm going to try and keep it up all summer. The local, city pool near me has a country club program where...
Ooh, that sounds fancy.
Yeah, I've been to that pool, I think, once outside of country club hours, and it's a little bit much. It's just a lot of teens. There's a lot of teens around, and it's just pretty full on nice days. But in the mornings, you can pay $50 for the whole summer, and you get to come in the mornings during this little exclusive time where most people just don't even know about it, or I guess have a job and can't go. So
this is how we become old and become morning people. It's just to get away from those youngsters.
It's not even that early. It starts at 9. It's not even an early thing, but I'm really excited about swimming every day this summer. Maybe I'll actually get a little bit of a tan. We'll see.
You're looking a little tan.
A little lightly baked?
Yeah, unlike my exclusively forearms.
Yeah, the farmer's tan it's rough. This is our Modern Horizons 3 Cube Community Set Review. Long time coming. We had a lot of other stuff going on, a lot of important episodes to record with special guests like Patrick and others. And so we are here joined by, of course, Parker, maybe a pool boy, Lamascus. Parker, are you a pool boy?
Have you seen how white I am?
Yeah, you're definitely very white, but I could see you...
I flee the sun, I flee the water, I flee anything that's outdoors.
You could do really early pool.
Yeah, I would love pre-dawn pool, maybe.
I feel like you're the kind of person that has SPF 90. You give me SPF 90 vibes.
Yeah, I've been getting into a little skincare routine this summer, and I've been putting on SPF 70 every morning before I walk to work.
Just on your face?
Yeah, face and arms a little bit.
Okay, that's impressive for a daily sunscreen routine, wow. SPF 70.
Everybody's got a new thing this summer.
Melanoma is serious business.
Get a new thing, Anthony. Get some sort of ointment to rub into your skin, and then we can talk about it.
Okay.
It's very important. It's good to care for your skin. Good on you, Parker. Being a responsible grown-up.
Yeah, I mean, mostly it's just a fear of melanoma. So, responsibility / fear, they come hand in hand.
I feel like all responsibility is rooted in fear, right?
Yeah.
Is that a cynical view?
No, it's just Freudian.
Is that a Freud thing?
I don't know.
You want to the fear. Anyway, we got a lot of cards to talk about because this is obviously a popular set. These Modern Horizons sets tend to be very popular among cube designers, and this one is no different, though the pattern of the popularity is a little bit different than we've seen in the past. Before we dive in, let's just talk about what this is, if this is your first episode of Lucky Paper Radio. This is the results of our Cube Community Set Review. So for every major set, we've recently given ourselves a break and not done this on smaller supplemental products all the time. But for every major set, we conduct a basic survey where we ask cube designers, anybody that wants to participate, to tell us what cards from that set they are interested in playing in their cube or cubes, and how confident they are, how excited they are that that cube is going to stick around in that list for a long time. And they rate that on a scale from 1 to 10. So we have the aggregate results of these surveys, and we're going to discuss them on this episode. And this is kind of our take on a set review because, I think there's an unspoken bias in a lot of set reviews that they're talking about a specific type of cube, usually some sort of power maxed or, vintage or legacy cube. And that's what they mean when they say a card is cubable. And this very intentionally is a broad survey. So the responses to this survey are not just going to be people playing powerful cubes. They could be people playing themed cubes, rarity restricted cubes, other specific focuses for their designs that are not just seeking pure power level. And I think the results are going to bear that out just glancing at them now. So did I do okay, Parker? I didn't make you do it this time. I feel like I always foisted on you, so I thought I would take your job.
Yeah, you did a great job. I don't think I have anything to add. No, let's dive right into it. So I want to talk a little bit first about how popular Modern Horizons 3 is compared to other sets of this year. Constructed is one thing, but Cube is another. So like Modern Horizons 3 obviously is making a constructed impact already. I think a couple of those cards broke the last Pro Tour. Who knows? I'm not really following it very closely.
Nadu definitely did quite a bit of work at the Pro Tour.
Yeah, I think it might be a genuine design mistake, like erroneous templating or something that led to that performance, but whatever. That doesn't necessarily translate to impacting Cube, but in this case, we do see that Modern Horizons 3 is the most popular set of the year, and we use a couple of different metrics to evaluate that. So we have 240 Cube submissions to our set survey at time of recording. 240 is not our all-time record for the number of people who responded. That achievement goes to actually Wilds of Eldraine, weirdly enough, followed by, I think, Midnight Hunt and then Modern Horizons 2 in third place. So Modern Horizons 3 doesn't have tons and tons of people responding relative to our all-time records, but there are two other metrics that I think are really important. One is that the median respondent to the Modern Horizons 3 survey is testing 16 cards from this set. That's a lot. Yeah, that's as much as I update sometimes in a whole quarter or whatever, and that's all happening at one set. So people are excited about a lot of cards, and they're also rating those cards pretty highly. If we look at how many cards people rated above like 7.75, so this is like the very upper tier of responses on our 1 to 10 scale. The median respondent is giving 4 cards that high rating, so 4 out of their roughly 16. And again, that's a very high number. People are expecting, without ever playing with the cards in some cases, they're expecting 4 cards to be staples by whatever criteria they're using, whether that's art or power level or other suitability for their environment. All of this is to say, Modern Horizons 3 is pretty popular in terms of just the number of people responding. It's not a record setter, but it does, in terms of enthusiasm for the cards, it ties our all-time record setter, which is Modern Horizons 2. Yeah, this is an extremely popular set, and I think it's safe to say this is the biggest cube set of the year.
Yeah, that I think is definitely a safe statement to make, even though the year is not over. I can't imagine another set being more popular amongst cube designers, broadly speaking.
I think a big part of it is that these Modern Horizons sets don't necessarily have the same constraints that a typical Premier set does, where they're trying to make sure that every card is sort of contributing to this pretty controlled narrative and like mechanical structure. There's just a lot more one-off cards that are just callbacks to things and opportunities to mash up mechanics. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to put in on the same card because of all the constraints that a normal set has. So because of that, there's just a lot more opportunity for individual cards that are going to suit cube designs.
I think that's absolutely right. Modern Horizons 3, can take the throttle off of the power level a little bit, especially at the common and uncommon level. And of course, those are the cards that are going to be most accessible to most cube curators. Some people do exclude rares and mythics, or some people have budget concerns, but everybody can find a common that's been pushed. And Modern Horizons 3 or all Modern Horizons sets are really well suited to do that. And then there's also, as you mentioned, that ability to be nostalgic and kind of dial up the mechanical complexity a little bit. Those are all things that cube curators love to see, generally.
So let's talk briefly about the headline mechanics that are not going to appear we're going to cover the top 11 cards here. And I should say, too, this is all numbers taken from our actual written set review, which Parker has written up and has a bunch of graphs and charts, and we'll let you dive into all of the data. So definitely check that out. We're only going to be able to scratch the surface here just because there are so many cards people are interested in. So if you want that full story, check it out on our website. Link will be in the show notes. But there are these two mechanics that are just not going to show up in these top 11 cards at all that were pretty primary to this set, and those mechanics are Energy and Devoid, neither of which are showing up really. I mean, do you know off the top of your head, Parker, where the first card with either of these mechanics pops up. Looks like Ghostfire Slice is down here around like 15 or 20 as the first Devoid card. And then Energy.
Yes, and the first Energy is Chthonian Nightmare at 15.8% testing.
So like 30th or 40th most popular card of the set, basically.
Yeah, it's not looking good for these two mechanics. There's Devoid, which is one thing, but then there's also Eldrazi as the creature type. The creature type is even less popular than Ghostfire Slice being Devoid. You have to scroll again down to like the 15% in order to find the common card that goes infinite with the thing. Oh, it's you have to find Basking Broodscale, which is a common, and it is the most popular Eldrazi, I think, at time of recording.
I gotta say, when I saw that Eldrazi was going to be a theme of this set, I was a little bit excited because I have been dabbling with an Eldrazi theme, at least theoretically, in the Degenerate Microcube, and I thought for sure we'd get a couple cards that would like push it over the top. And at the same time, I was also doing a full vintage roto we talked about previously on this podcast of all of Magic's card pool in all of history and was drafting an Eldrazi deck. And honestly, I think they were pretty conservative with the Eldrazi in this set. Like, none of them seemed to be, knock on wood. I'm sure that, I'm missing something, but I didn't really look at that list and find almost anything I would have wanted to play in my full vintage roto Eldrazi deck, and I'm not sure if there's anything actually here for the Degenerate Microcube to actually make that archetype viable.
So your benchmark for being pretty conservative is they didn't make one of the top 360 most powerful broken Eldrazi ever.
I mean,
because if you look at the limited set, they really, really push some of these Eldrazi. There are some commons that are just insane here.
Yeah, I'm not talking about retail limited. I'm talking about constructed and, cube designs, basically. To be clear, like, I think I might be playing a card like Endbringer, which is certainly not one of the most powerful 360 cards of all time. But when you're in a cube environment where the context has changed and you have access reliably to Eye of Ugin and Eldrazi Temple, it dramatically changes the card valuations. And even with that context, pushing heavily to make the Eldrazi viable, there's a couple that I think are okay, but there's definitely none in this set that I'm like, this is going to change the shape of this archetype in, a cube that focuses on this theme. So I obviously, like, in a cube like the Devoid cube, Dan Schneider's cube, the cards had a huge impact because that cube is all about that theme specifically. But
having gotten stomped on by the Eldrazi in that cube, I can confirm that.
Yeah, but I said relatively conservative in that in the past when they've done Eldrazi, they've broken them. We had a whole series of time called Eldrazi Winter for a reason, and it wasn't pleasant. So probably good that they didn't push them, extra hard, but just a thing I noticed, basically.
I think a lot of that is due to the safety valve of putting colored mana on a lot of these Eldrazi. When you have like Thought-Knot Seer or whatever, it's really easy to accelerate that out with Ugin's Temple and, Eye of Ugin and Eldrazi Temple. In this case, you sometimes have to pay colorless mana and colored mana on the same card. And so it's just requiring a lot more commitment, especially in a drafted environment like Cube.
It makes sense, though, to me that we're seeing these sort of like the headline mechanics a little bit lower down because they really work well when you have just a lot of them all together. Devoid is a thing that doesn't really matter for an individual card. It just matters when other things care about casting colorless spells. So I think that those are the kinds of mechanics that are going to be really important and impactful, like the Devoid cube. If you have a cube that's all about that, but as one-off individual cards, if you're just adding, 5 to 10 cards from the set, they don't make as much sense. And I think Energy is in a really similar place where Chthonian Nightmare, it makes sense that we're seeing it a little bit higher because it fuels itself, it repeatedly gives you some energy, so it kind of just works as an individual card, but other kind of cards as a one-off aren't going to make as much sense because you're not going to have that sort of like environmental systemic payoff of generating incidental energy here and there.
There even are plenty of other cards in the set that do fuel themselves with regards to their energy usage, but I think the fact that Chthonian Nightmare, which is basically a fixed, in air quotes, version of Recurring Nightmare, which is actually funny. I was talking with people on a local play group about this, and it was Julian who pointed out that, like, part of the reason it's fixed is that it has an ETB trigger, and so you can respond to that trigger and disenchant it.
That's a very funny aspect of it.
And we were talking, and I was like, man, Recurring Nightmare would be a better card in every way, I think. I mean, except for power level, but a better card from a design perspective, from a play pattern perspective, if it just ETB, you lose a life. Now you've got a trigger you can respond to disenchant it, and now also you can't just infinitely do it because you have some pressure on your life total. But for most applications, that doesn't really change the, way Recurring Nightmare works, aside from being able to be disenchanted. I was just like, man, the different world we could have lived in if they had Recurring Nightmare cost you your life on ETB or something would have been kind of cool. Anyway, I was going to say, That's a beloved card. Recurring Nightmare is a card people really, really love, and so seeing a fixed or modified or rift version of that, still very low, even though it does fuel itself, I think speaks to also the aesthetic problems people have with energy. Even if the cards mechanically work just fine on their own and don't need other energy cards to actually be supported, I think aesthetically a lot of designers just don't want to have 1 or 2 energy cards in their cube, and I don't either, so I totally get it.
Yeah, seems reasonable. Conversely, we have mechanics like Bestow and Adapt, which are just really flexible mechanics that lots of cards care about counters or being targeted or enchanted, or just, the things are creatures you can enchant. So it makes sense that we're seeing a lot of those individual cards with those more flexible mechanics higher up on this list.
It's kind of interesting. Of course, criticisms that some of our survey respondents filled out in their, open comment section, they were saying that Eldrazi and Energy are both, sometimes parasitic or weak or whatever. And I was thinking about it. I don't actually think these cards individually are weak. Let's take Tune the Narrative. This is a blue mana for an instant. You draw a card and get 2 energy counters. In the right deck, I think that could be just as powerful as Consider or Opt. But the fact is that most cubes don't support the deck that makes Tune the Narrative good. The same goes for Galvanic Discharge, which is a shock variant or kind of a lightning bolt variant that involves energy. These cards are powerful in the right deck. And the reason that makes sense for a Modern Horizons set is that you can't keep pushing the power level up, right? You have to eventually push the power level out a little bit so that it's not just the same synergies with fetch lands and filling the graveyard and storming off and synergizing with Tron. From WotC's perspective, you can't just keep pushing those same things or you'll push the power level and it will escalate. Instead, you want to diversify the power level and you want essentially deck builders to have incentives to build decks around other groups of synergies. I think Energy and Eldrazi are both really good bets in that sense. It's just that Cube doesn't have access to the same density of often people don't play duplicates, and also there have been only 3 sets with Energy as opposed to 30 years of graveyard synergies. So I think that's a lot of the kind of perceptual differences between Modern Horizons 3 and the previous sets.
Should we talk individual cards?
Let's do it.
So we're going to start at the 11th most popular card just because there's a 3% gap between that and the next most popular card. So it feels kind of like a natural break for us. But I do want to emphasize that people should go check this review out because there's a lot of cards that fall below this that I think are really worth consideration. Maybe we'll do a little honorable mentions thing at the end because I have a couple cards I do want to touch on that are not in the top 11. But starting at number 11, we have a card with a very cool name and very cool art. It is Emperor of Bones. 1 and a black for a 2/2 creature skeleton noble. At the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. Then it has Adapt 2 for 1 and a black. And Adapt 2, for those that don't know, is if the creature does not have +1/+1 counters on it, you can pay 1 and a black to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and you can do that at instant speed. It's kind of like Monstrosity, but fixed, frankly, because Monstrosity was awkward in a couple of ways. It also has the ability, whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Emperor of Bones, put a creature card exile with Emperor of Bones onto the battlefield under your control with a finality counter on it. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Is the finality counter... Does this card have a thing that interacts with the finality counters? Do finality counters have rules themselves?
Yeah, they do have rules baggage. I'm pretty sure you can still bounce the thing to your hand and things like that, but if it would die, it gets exiled instead.
So this is just like an evergreen counter that they snuck in here?
Yeah, it's been around a couple times, but it is a relatively new mechanic.
Pause. I think Finality is not a replacement effect. I think it is a triggered ability. Let me check. Finality counters. If a creature with... Oh, no, it is replacement. That's weird. That's really weird. Why didn't they just say exile it at the beginning of the next end step?
Because I guess you can bounce it, right? That's what Anthony's saying?
You could bounce it, or it also triggers your Mayhem Devil.
I mean, also, you can't say exile it because if they can just sacrifice it to a sack outlet, and then I guess if you sacrifice it, it wouldn't be exiled with Emperor of Bones. Look, I think this is the perfect card to start on because there's a lot of things about this card that are extremely cool. The use of Adapt here is extremely cool. The fact that it's, Grave Hate that also has this upside is very cool. The fact that it doesn't just do this when it adapts, but it does it whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on it. Means that it has a really cool applications in decks that have other ways to put +1/+1 counters on things. It's very elegant in the way that it can slot into a mechanic like that and has a lot of cool lines and applications, I'm sure, that come from it. At the same time, it's also extraordinarily complicated. The fact that, I mean, we're all pretty enfranchised Magic players, and we're all like, finality counter, what exactly is that again? Like, I'm actually kind of amazed sitting here looking at it that there's no reminder text. It doesn't tell you what a finality counter is at all on it.
You should know that. That's an evergreen mechanic, Andy.
When did it become evergreen? That's crazy.
Immediately. They printed it and they were like, this is new. It's here forever.
How many cards have finality counters?
It is 12.
12 cards, so 11 before Emperor of Bones. Yeah, just a little bit, in order to get a design like this that has so many things that touch so many other mechanics and works in so many ways, you often end up with this kind of creep of complexity that, I didn't know what a finality counter was. I would have assumed it would have exiled it if it left the battlefield at all, but it turns out you can actually just bounce it and it's fine.
The fact that it doesn't actually... It seems like a good thing, a good technology to have in the game, but the fact that it doesn't work quite like I would expect it to...
It's called finality, but you can just bounce it?
Right. Like, there were so many things. Like, this reminds me a lot of the 3-mana creature that when it attacks, you can reanimate something... Can't remember.
Isareth the Awakener?
Isareth the Awakener. And it's like a very similar thing, and finality counters would have made a lot of sense there, except those actually are final instead of mostly final.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at this design. It feels like I can almost sort of construct a narrative how they might have designed this card where, okay, you want to be able to adapt and reanimate stuff, and it's cool that they separated the adapt from the +1/+1 counter from that ability to reanimate things so that you can do it multiple times. Cool. But then they didn't want to make it anything. They want to put some guardrails on it, so there's a little bit of reasonability to it, and so they made it, well, you have to attack first and be able to exile things. So they sort of feels like they've put up these guardrails to force you to play this card in a certain way, but that does result in just a lot of complexity in how are you going to actually get to the point of using this card.
It's also notable that Adapt does not have reminder text, and that mechanic, only appeared in the Guilds of Ravnica block. It's not trivial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hard to kind of piece this card together.
And just imagine how complicated it would be in terms of words if it did have the Adapt reminder text. Like, it wouldn't fit in the text box. You wouldn't be able to do it. Which is the kind
of have a scroll bar.
That is the kind of leeway they have in Modern Horizon sets that they just don't have in regular sets. And so it's kind of cool. We get this card. At least we do get cards like this in sets like this. But, there's a lot of things about this card I really like. I like having incidental grave hate that is incremental instead of, all in. Mm-hmm. I like all of the, cool knobs and tie-ins this has with other mechanics that are going on in a cube. But, again, our play group, we have a lot of people coming in and out or that are newer to cube, and I'm just imagining someone looking at this card and not knowing exactly what Adapt does and having no idea what a finality counter is and just not picking it because they don't want to be embarrassed to have to ask what these mechanics do, which is a very common thing. So
I feel like I'd be all over this if it were just the first two abilities and forget the reanimation stuff. I do love this exiling only one card a turn. It keeps anybody who's up to no good, it keeps them in check, but it doesn't punish somebody who's just trying to get Delirium to just do fair things.
I think it definitely punishes Delirium.
Well, a little bit, but it's not an immediate hosing in the same way that Endurance would be.
Yes, yeah, the all-in ones I don't love as much. I will say that comparing this type of grave hate to something like a Lion Sash or Scavenging Ooze, I think I would prefer people to have a choice around it. Do I want to spend resources to deal with your graveyard? And then also that choice comes with the option to deal with more at once versus this kind of you just get it every turn, even though you weren't looking for it. It reminds me of Clothis, which I loathe. So
yeah, I also misunderstood this as well, that it doesn't have to attack. It's just at the beginning of combat.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot here that's easy to miss.
Yeah, you don't have to attack or anything. You just get to do it. But just getting it every turn, I think that will naturally punish Delirium decks, and without the deck builder that put the Emperor of Bones in their deck necessarily even trying, which at least I like with Scavenging Ooze. Not only do you have to put it in your deck, but you then have to also decide, I'm going to spend mana to exile cards instead of doing other things with my mana. It doesn't just happen for free. Or on a Territorial Kava, you have to attack. You have to do something to get that exile instead of it just being churning along as the game progresses. To wrap up Emperor of Bones, it's being tested by 28.7% of our testers and has an average rank of 7. So we always say these percentages, and I think we always feel pressure to say something about them. Some people like this card, and that's how much they like it.
How many people? About a third.
The numbers are the numbers. 28% of our testers and ranked a 7.
Next up, we have Brainsurge. This is 2 and a blue for an instant. Draw 4 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. This is also being tested by about 29% of our respondents with a rating of 6.4%, so a little bit lower. So This card is obviously a big callback to Brainstorm. It's a little bit bigger. It's a little bit more expensive. Well, quite a bit more expensive. So it kind of makes sense to me that a lot of people are interested in this because it is a callback to a familiar card. It's a nice, simple design, but it's maybe unclear how this is actually going to perform, so people are a little bit more skeptical of it.
The more I think about Brainsurge, the more cool I think it is, and I almost even want to find some space for it in the Bun Magic Cube. Being an instant and digging 4 cards deep, like, it's quite strong. I mean, 2-for-1s are good at 3 mana in a lot of cubes, and Divination doesn't cut it these days because it's a sorcery and also just draws you 2, but this is 2 major upgrades on Divination that I think make it a lot more appealing, even in more power-focused cubes. That said, I am surprised actually to see it this high because it's not the flashiest, it's not the most exciting, so I'm heartened that people are excited about even the really simple cards like Brainsurge.
Yeah, it's really clean and easy to understand. The one thing that I don't love about it is the art is just like, your bog standard blue electricity magic or whatever.
An eye with lightning coming out of it, I guess.
Or is it neurons? I don't know.
Oh yeah, there's some neurons here in this stuff.
I don't envy the art directors or illustrators that have to draw a Brainsurge. There's been so many cantrips that have been illustrated over time, and like, what do you even do?
This one's more blue magic. Draw blue magic.
Like, some of them are great. Like, I love Ponder. I think that's great art for a cantrip.
Which one? Because I think there are multiple excellent Ponder.
Well, I'm sorry. The original is actually
the original is the
Lorwyn.
mermaids.
Not Lorwyn. The M10 version with the three
moons.
3 moons. I think is
Love the 3
is
moons.
a beautiful interpretation for what that card does. But it's hard. It's really hard, I think, to illustrate a cantrip.
I think maybe another thing going for this card is it feels like it's going to scale with the power level of the environment pretty well. In a high-powered environment where you have fetch lands, it obviously gets a lot more powerful because, like Brainstorm, you can shuffle away stuff from your hand you don't need at the right time. And at lower powers, this is, I think, also just going to be fine as something that's in between a Brainstorm and a Divination. It's just going to be like a pretty straightforward card advantage card.
It's hard to imagine cubes where it would be awful, and it's hard to imagine cubes where it would be
Exactly.
broken. Like, I think it's totally fine in the regular cube. I think it also could be totally fine in the Bun Magic Cube, and those are pretty different cubes in terms of their raw power level.
How do we feel about Turbo Cube real quick?
I still think it's great
Also
there.
good there?
Yeah, we need to make some
me too.
Turbo Cube updates.
Yes, we
I
need
need
to.
your help with being, motivated and organized.
Because this can be played at
Yes.
Steel City Cube, right?
Yep, so we definitely need to make some updates, probably this weekend.
You gotta place some orders soon if you're going to need cards getting here in time.
All right, our next Modern Horizons 3 card is Reckless Pyrosurfer. It's tested by 30% of our respondents with an average rank of 6.6. It is a creature, human scout, costs 1 and a red. It is a 2/2 haste, and it has a landfall ability. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Pyrosurfer gains Battlecry until end of turn. Battlecry, as a reminder, whenever this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Each instance of Battlecry triggers separately. Yeah, this is the latest in a long line of hasty 2-mana 2/2 creatures in red. This one has a lot of synergy with fetch lands because you can fetch, crack the fetch, and that gives you 2 Battlecry triggers. But it actually scales really well into the late game because that's when you're likely to have the most creatures and therefore the most bang for your buck from the Battlecry triggers. So pretty interesting and clean for how interesting it is. No surprise to me that it's tested this highly.
I think it's really cool. I am still a tiny bit surprised to see it this high just because it's not the most powerful card in the set, certainly. But I think it's really awesome how this card is actually quite simple. Battlecry you can learn and shortcut pretty easily, and Landfall you can also learn and shortcut pretty easily. And so even though it's got a decent bit of text on it, not so much it doesn't have room for the reminder text. It does have reminder text for Battlecry here.
And importantly, it has reminder text for the fact that if you have multiple landfalls, it does trigger twice.
Yes, it also clarifies that you get to do it multiple times. A really clean little card that I'm just kind of obsessed with and excited to play in a couple of my own cubes. So
I like seeing these more aggressively tilted landfall cards. I feel like landfall makes a lot of sense sort of in the late game. You want to, if you're just drawing cards, if you don't draw gas, you're at least drawing a land that'll interact with your cards. It is a cool way that landfall works. And cards like this and step links just feel like a different take on landfall where they just let you push through a bunch of damage, and it'd be cool to just curve a step links into this and then crack a bunch of fetch lands.
how do we feel about the man surfing on the lava? Do we like this? Is it a man? I don't know. The character surfing on the lava.
Now that you call it out, low.
Yeah, it's not my favorite part of
I'm
the
also
card.
low on it.
Not my favorite
Yeah.
part of the card.
I mean, it's kind of like a callback to Avalanche Riders, and we've seen plenty of... There's actually kind of a lot of surfing happening in Magic, now that I'm thinking about it.
I don't think of the Avalanche Riders as surfing, but I see where you're getting at. It definitely is, I think, in that same oeuvre.
I guess more sledding. It's actually got even a handle on it.
There's some sort of goblin sled drivers or something. Yeah, sledding has a long tradition in Magic, apparently.
Next up, the 8th most popular card in Modern Horizons 3 for cubes is Anthony's favorite, Wight of the Reliquary. It is a black and a green for a 2/2 creature zombie knight. It's got vigilance, and it gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and it has an activated ability, tap, sacrifice another creature, search your library for a land card, put it on the battlefield, tapped, then shuffle. Knight of the Reliquary has changed, is now a zombie and a little bit different, and I think quite a bit more powerful if we're just looking at it from a pure power level perspective. Knight of the Reliquary itself, costing 3, and not having vigilance and these other sort of effects, I think, does make it a little worse. Here, this is probably a little harder to grow naturally in a cube with a lot of fetch lands, which is where you see cards like Knight of the Reliquary most often. You know, you're going to be putting lands in your graveyard over the natural course of the game in the first couple turns, which is not necessarily true of creatures. You know, I think you will often run out Wight of the Reliquary without having any creatures in your graveyard just as a 2/2, but as an engine, I think it's more efficient and just kind of feels itself in a more powerful way. Very similar numbers here to Reckless Pyrosurfer, also being tested by 30% of our respondents and with a slightly higher rating of 6.8. Parker, we've talked about this one before. What do you think of Wight of the Reliquary?
Obviously very powerful and kind of intuitively appealing. It's just fun to be able to both attack and activate the ability. The abilities kind of nest together in a really pleasing way.
I agree.
That said, the downside of nostalgia is that, you know, sometimes you get to call back to an iconic card and everybody's happy for that. Sometimes your callback just ends up kind of rubbing our noses in the fact that Knight of the Reliquary isn't modern playable anymore. It needs a full mana off of its rate to even be considered, and vigilance, which can be a little bit of a bummer, especially in Cube, where honestly, I think a lot of us kind of underappreciate the amount of nostalgia that Cube has and like the importance of nostalgia in Cube. And so, you know, if I were to play Wight and Knight in the same cube or in the same deck even, I could actually see that being a net negative for my enjoyment. Like, oh, I was so excited to play with Knight of the Reliquary, but this zombie that looks the same is just so much better, and it made me realize I should cut this old iconic card that I love or whatever. Like, I'm, you know, play acting a little bit, but
You little
I do
ham.
think that's what?
Called you a little ham. You were play acting. You're hamming it up.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, whatever. I just do think there is this like dark side to nostalgia, and it shows up a little bit
The
for
dark
me
side
on,
of
on this
nostalgia,
card.
meaning it turned into a zombie.
Yeah.
I mean, nostalgia actually means like the pain of memory, right? So it's kind of dark as it stands, I think.
Huh. Really
Yeah,
makes
this puts
you
the
think.
pain in nostalgia then.
Wight of the Reliquary, putting the pain in nostalgia.
All right, let's move on to Warren Soultrader. This is 2 and a black for a zombie goblin wizard. It is a 3/3 and it has pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, create a treasure token. It's being tested by, similar to these other cards, 32% of our respondents with a rating of 7. All these cards up here have pretty similar metrics in those terms. I feel like all I want to do about this card is talk about this sick Pete Venters art. Pete Venters has been one of the illustrators that has just worked with Magic, if not from the inception, I feel like from very, very early on in the game, and has just done so many cool things. And this has like a very positive, nostalgic feel to me. The mechanics of it are also pretty cool.
Yeah, the illustration's got that old school drip to it. You know, the kind of like weird physics. It's very illustrative in a like mildly naive way that I think is very charming. I agree. I love that they slapped a pay 1 life on this ability. Free sack outlets are in demand and quite powerful. They always overperform people's expectations, especially in formats like Commander, which I'm sure was front of mind when thinking about a card like this. But I love that they just didn't make it go infinite immediately with, I'm sure, a zillion cards, but instead just go arbitrarily large until you run out of life, which I think is a cool way to limit that a little bit.
Yeah, this is even a zombie, so if you have Gravecrawler, you can just deal 20 damage to yourself. That's cool.
That's a cool way to go out.
I like that.
Nice. Have you noticed in the background of the art, there are these little like there's a spotlight behind the wizard, and you can see the shadows of impaled goblins that are being cast onto the wall.
It rules.
So sick.
Yeah.
So sick.
Rules. The color's good. Yeah, people love their Aristocrats decks. I think it's a very popular archetype in a lot of cubes of different power levels, and this will slot in nicely to all of those. I'm not surprised to see this highly, and they also just gave it, I don't know, maybe 3 of the most appealing type lines you could possibly give a creature. Zombie, Goblin, Wizard. I mean, there's things you're going to queue off of those types in a lot of different cubes as well.
If they could have just fit Fungus in there, it would have made me happy, but I'll take it.
This one I'm not surprised to see high. Honestly, I kind of maybe expected to see this even a little higher, but no surprise, this is a very popular card to me.
I think it's quietly very, very powerful, and like the temptation would be to maybe put it in a cube with other Lorwyn goblins and like make that creature type line really matter, or at least that's my temptation as a designer. Of course, the fact that it's a 3-mana 3/3 with upside makes it like so much better than most Lorwyn era creatures.
That's one of the things I've actually noticed the most about the neoclassical cube, Parker, is that I have really come to appreciate when your like build around synergy creatures have just like absolutely awful stats for their mana cost, which is definitely, I think, a pattern of old school Magic that is not carried through into new school Magic. Like I look at cards like Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker or
Oracle of Moldiah or Seedborn Muse.
Exactly. All these cards that just like, if you printed this today, it would like Seedborn Muse would just be a 5/5 or something, because in Commander it doesn't make that much of a difference, and that's a big thing that they're actually thinking about with all these cards. But it's actually really charming to me to have them be little dinky guys at high mana value. So this does strike me as like it could have been a Lorwyn card in flavor if it was a 2/1 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And like I don't think that's a bad thing. That makes it able to be considered in my cube that is,
for sure,
using those 20/20 rates. I just do think, if this is your first time listening to one of these set reviews, I'm pointing out this, the pain and nostalgia, because I know that's a temptation for me to put this in an environment where the rate is like too good or whatever, and then I might be disappointed if it doesn't see play for its goblin synergies and it's just seeing play because it's a really good 3/3. So again, not a bad thing, but just something to kind of consider.
And yeah, you said it was quietly very powerful. I think it's maybe loudly very powerful. This free sack outlets are just always so much better than you expect. You're never going to get your creature control magicked. You can also mess with some of their other interaction. They try to board wipe, you just say, okay, fine, I'll make 6 mana and next turn do whatever the heck I want with it. Having that option for free, I mean, the life cost is something, but for mostly free is huge upside on a card like this.
Actually, I think I meant quietly very powerful, even when it's not being played in an Aristocrats deck. Like I would consider just playing this in my black-green mid-range.
Absolutely.
Just like very face up, no synergies overtly, because it's that good.
Yes, that is a good way to put it, and I agree completely.
Okay, so I think I'm next up, and I get to read Phlage, Titan of Fire's Fury. This is 1 red-white for a legendary creature, Elder Giant. It is a 6/6, and it has the abilities: when Phlage enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped. And then whenever Phlage enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. And it has the escape ability for red, white, exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. You may cast this card from your graveyard for its escape cost. This is tested by 32, almost a third of our respondents, with an average rank of 7. Yeah, it's like Uro. It's like Kroxa. People thought it wouldn't be good because it's Boros and like it wouldn't be good in Burn or whatever. This was the modern pundits talking about Constructed before this card came out. And
wait,
now,
people thought it wouldn't be good after seeing the mechanics, or they thought theoretically if they ever make a red-white Titan, it won't be good?
After seeing this card, they were like, it's not good. You can't play it in Burn or whatever.
Well, those people need to find God.
Yeah, it's quite good. Actually, this is another recurring theme of our surveys, which is before the cards actually come out and people play with them, and especially before any pros have a chance to play with them, we are usually pretty bad as a cube community at predicting which cards will be powerful.
I mean, as Magic players in general, I think.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Just something to keep in mind. But this card, obviously really, really powerful. I'm excited for it because my cube kind of operates at that power level. And it will be something that will kind of give my Boros decks another direction to go.
I'm excited about this one too.
Yeah.
I'm a notorious Uro defender, even though it's got life gain. I have played a little bit with this card in a friend's cube that is very similar in sort of style and power level to the Bun Magic cube, and I will say that this card is obviously powerful. It is contingent on that Lightning Helix being good, and I think it's much more context powerful than the other Titans. Like, Uro just kind of does Uro's thing, and it doesn't really matter what you're doing on the other side of the battlefield. Uro's going to be very, very strong. I was playing a control deck against my opponent who had Phlage, and I was kind of not sweating it. Like, I had removal spells for it, so it dealt a little more damage to me with these Lightning Helixes. And in one situation, actually, in a very cool way, was cast and then escaped in the same turn to get rid of my Sheoldred. So that did come up, which was kind of interesting. But a control deck, I think, is way less afraid of this than Kroxa or Uro, because it doesn't represent any actual card advantage unless you have things on board that can be Lightning Helixed away, which control decks often don't. So that's an interesting difference, I think, between these cards, because conversely, I think Phlage is going to be probably quite a bit better than Uro or Kroxa against a aggro deck, right? You're just going to get to remove their threat and gain some life, and then threaten doing that again very soon. And that kind of card advantage, compared to just making a discard a card or something, is so much more potent in those matchups. So I think it's probably more variable in how powerful it is based on what your opponent is doing, unlike the other Titans, which kind of just do their thing and are very good all the time.
Something I think is interesting, we've talked about the complexity of some of these cards and how that might be a factor. And, comparing this to Emperor of Bones, there's similar amount of words on the card, but the patterns and similarities between cards make it so much easier to digest complex things. And the fact that you can just say, oh yeah, this is Uro but Lightning Helix, these are two concepts I already know, and it just makes perfect sense. And if they had twisted the knobs a little bit, say they wanted to make it, 2 damage instead of 3 because it was just a little too powerful, or add 1 more mana to the escape cost, that would have made the card much harder to understand. So it's cool that they committed to sticking to that pattern for this cycle.
I think I remember seeing like a mistranslation or some sort of altered image for Phlage when it was being spoiled. And I thought I saw exile 6 other cards from your graveyard. And I was like, it really shook me up for a second. I was like, whoa, have I been reading Uro wrong this whole time? Yeah, so I agree. That pattern is really powerful.
I do everything you said makes a lot of sense. I will say that Emperor of Bones does have 2 things on it that do not literally have the text for what they do on the card. This has all the text. All the rules text is on this card.
That's a great point.
So it's got the same number of words, except that Emperor of Bones is missing the reminder text for finality counters and adapt, and this has reminder text for all of its mechanics.
Fair. I do have another criticism, though. We already have a character in this game called Phage, and now we have Phlage.
Look, we also have Markov and Karlov. Look, we're just running out of combinations of nouns and verbs. It's just going to happen.
I guess so.
It falls to me to talk about the 5th most popular card from Modern Horizons 3, which is my favorite, Phelia Exuberant Shepherd. 1 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature dog. It's got flash, and whenever Phelia Exuberant Shepherd attacks, exile up to 1 other target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Phelia. If there's one thing I want to say about this card, it's just that Corgis are noble, working animals with a rich pedigree in actual herding and shepherding, and for anybody to say otherwise is hateful and rude.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to say about this card either.
Well, I second the motion on Corgis, noble beasts. Mechanically, powerful aggro threat with a little bit of synergy enabling, or a lot of synergy enabling. This is a card that I'm explicitly not playing because I don't want my players to synergize with it. I don't know if that makes me a bad person.
Yeah, get him, Parker.
I just know, I would put this in a deck to synergize with, Flicker Wisp, or, I don't know, to exile my opponent's creatures and push through damage. But I know that if I put it in my cube, at least, 5 of my players on a given night would put this in to try and create some sort of looping situation or draw their entire deck.
And you know who you are, players. You know who you are.
Yeah, I love you all, but I'm not going to put this in for you. I do think, I don't know, you have to kind of curate the range of just how degenerate you can go. So I don't know. I'm not on it. It's cool, but
how do you draw your whole deck with this? I'm trying to find it. You have to Arcane Savant with time warp.
I don't know. Probably that combat celebrant that lets you take extra combat steps.
But it doesn't come back until the end step, so you're not going to get.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can't do it.
Well, The thing I'm really afraid of...
Engagement farming. Sound off in the comments if you can figure out how to draw your whole deck with Phelia, Exuberant, Shepherd.
The thing I'm actually afraid of is like flickering your own Muldrifter and just doing it very, very slowly. That's the worst case scenario for me that I want to avoid.
Yeah, we said when we talked about this card on our previous episode, we were talking about the cards we were personally interested in from this set, that I think one of the hallmarks of unfun cards that's most common and easy to see coming is if they do the same thing over and over again. And Phelia definitely has the risk of doing the same thing over and over again every single turn, the same way that Soultrader does, same way that Recurring Nightmare does, same way that some of these all-time groaners do. I thought of one more thing about this card that I really dislike aesthetically, which is that it has Flash, but the Flash doesn't actually matter for its ability, which triggers when it attacks. And so many other cards like this that exile a thing temporarily have Flash because it's also a means of protecting them. It's your, White Mane Lions or whatever. It's so weird to give Flash to this when it does the thing that you would want it to do on ETB to protect your stuff, but it doesn't do that. It only does it when it attacks. It's like you made it a little more powerful. It dodges sorcery speed removal for one activation now at the cost of being, I think, pretty dissonant with what the actual mechanics of the card are.
So you don't understand that all corgis have Flash. That's just a thing about them.
That's true, actually.
Should we talk about the number 4 card, 6? This is 2 and a green for
Who's
a legendary
on 6?
creature, Tree Folk. It is a 2/4. It has reach, and whenever 6 attacks, mill 3 cards. You may put a land card from among them into your hand. As long as it's your turn, non-land permanents you own in your graveyard have Retrace, which has a lot of reminder text that you may cast permanent cards from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying their mana costs. So importantly, Retrace does not exile them from your graveyard, correct? You can continue to retrace things for as many lands as you have?
That do be how Retrace works, and it says right there on the reminder text, which it has printed on the card.
Perfect. And obviously you're going to get a bunch of extra lands into your hand as well as spells to retrace because it's milling your library whenever it attacks, so this card seems incredibly powerful and just like a self-fueling engine.
I was tentatively interested in this card, and I have since played with it a little bit, and I am not kind of in love with it. I think this card is really, really, really cool. The thing I didn't quite clock the first time I saw it was the fact that you can, on 4 mana, just play it and then immediately lightning bolt something. Immediately turn an extra land into a lightning bolt. You don't have to wait. You don't have to attack with it to do any triggers. You just get to... I think I missed that because of the attack trigger seeming like obviously it's related, but you don't have to... If it's already in your graveyard, you can just retrace a thing as soon as you play it, which is a big power level upgrade and also I think opens up really cool sequencing that would not be there if you had to wait to do this, because you can kind of ambush your opponent in a way, or it's like the green Snapcaster Mage in some ways.
Hang on. Non-land permanent cards in your graveyard.
Aha.
Okay, yeah, so
Oops.
Lightning Bolt's a bad example. You can seal a
bad
fire.
example of a permanent.
You can seal a fire something, which, I mean, it's worth noting that obviously Aces and Sorceries go to the graveyard much more naturally, and so that would be more powerful, obviously, if you could just do that.
Did you cast a lightning bolt with this? You have to tell us.
My
if you cast
opponent
a
might
lightning
have,
bolt.
to be perfectly honest. I can't remember now, but my opponent had the 6, and I think they might have done something like that. But being able to get something back immediately is a very cool thing on 4 mana instead of just 3 mana. My one tiny irk here is the reach line. I guess a Tree Folk, so I guess give it reach. But
is a 2/4 with reach your least favorite body of Magic card?
It's up there.
Yes.
It's very defensive, but I actually kind of like that it's a really good control card, essentially, in green, which is weird and cool and I think powerful.
You might have talked me into it. I was not initially very impressed with this card, but seems cool.
I like that all the rules text fits on the card. I can't believe I have to say that now, but I do apparently. I like that all the rules text is on the card. I think that's elegant. Yeah, it's a neat little package that I think has... It's one of these cards that enables whatever else your deck is doing, I think, in the best of times, which is some of my favorite cards to put in cubes. It just does more of whatever your deck can do, which is very cool.
And this is being tested by 37% of our respondents, which is a bit of a jump up from what we've been talking about, but only a rating of 6.8. So a lot of people are interested in it. They're interested in it, but not super, super confident.
Which, makes sense in the sense that this card is kind of unlike any other card we've ever seen. It doesn't really have a direct analog.
It's a lot like the green Snapcaster Mage, if you think about it.
Okay, I'm going to get dragged for that in all the comments this week. Looking forward to it.
I'll rescue you by moving on to our next card, the third most popular card from Modern Horizons 3. It is Nethergoyf. This is a single black mana for a creature Lurgoyf. Nethergoyf's power is equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard. and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. And it has an escape ability. For 2 and a black, exile any number of other cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types from among them. It's tested by 38% of our respondents with an average ranking of 7. It's Tarmogoyf, but it only counts your graveyard instead of both, and you can recast it.
In love.
I'm also in love, as listeners might have been able to guess. Yeah, extremely powerful, extremely cool. It's a little bit odd that it works differently than Tarmogoyf, because I could see playing both of these in the same deck, and so then having to track 2 different Tarmogoyf-esque numbers could get annoying. But other than that, just really exciting. Now, I will point out, while we're here, Nethergoyf in some ways is like the Ragavan of this set. What do you think? Is that an overstatement?
I think Ocelot Pride is the Ragavan of the set, and it's way down here, super low. I mean, relatively low, lower than I expected it to be. In terms of raw power level, I don't think this is anywhere near Ragavan. It requires so much more setup. It's also, generally speaking, not going to be terrifying on turn 1, which is exactly when Ragavan is most terrifying. It doesn't feel Ragavan-y to me. It also, it's just a threat. I mean, it draws, I guess, another copy of itself when it dies in some ways, but it doesn't represent any card advantage, doesn't represent any ramp. It's a creature you attack your opponent with to reduce their life total to 0.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. I guess I was thinking about just how obviously powerful this is and how it's all upside in many ways, how it's a callback to a card that is iconic and legendary. Not in the rules text sense, but in terms of its reputation as a Magic card, Tarmogoyf. And it's really odd to me to compare this to Ragavan and see that Ragavan during Modern Horizons 2 was tested by 60% of our respondents.
Wow.
Over half.
I think a lot of things have changed about the way that cubes are designed, the way that Magic cards are digested. I remember when Ragavan came out, everyone was thirsty for another good red 2/1 for 1 mana, which is not a thing I feel like I hear most cube designers talking about anymore, partially because we just have a lot of them now. So if you want that kind of card, you are sated. You don't necessarily need more of them, but also because, I think there's fewer people that are just chasing the most powerful cards. I am shocked to see Ocelot Pride down here at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. The 16th most popular card in the set, only tested by 24% of our respondents, because that card to me seems like the Ragavan of the set in the sense that it is a mythic rare, it is going to snowball out of control on turn 1, and it's absolutely horrifying, and it can just take over a whole game. But people just aren't on it, at least not at all with the same enthusiasm they were on Ragavan.
And not just Ragavan, Ignoble Hierarch was also tested by 60% of our respondents, and so was the card Damn.
Damn was tested by that many. That's kind of wild to think about. That is a little bit
surprising.
Yeah. So, I just want to let that sink in. On average, in the aggregate, Cube curators are testing just as many cards for this set as Modern Horizons 2, and they're rating them just as highly in aggregate, but they do not agree on the top 3 cards.
Awesome. Love to hear it.
Anything close to the same extent as last time. I do think that's really cool. It might be, like Andy mentioned, that cubes are being designed differently. Could be that our audience has shifted a little bit. As Anthony has completed his years-long journey from power maxing tech bro to regular cube scrapwork mutt lover, it could be that our audience has shifted with him,
I don't know about that narrative.
I like all
there.
this slander. This is great. The other cards that have come to mind when I think of this that I wanted to mention that were going to be things that we're just going to come back to at the end, but I'll mention now because I think it's the right time to talk about them, is the flip Planeswalkers. I got back into Magic with Origins, basically. That was the first set I remember coming out after I got back into Magic. The first couple of sets I played were Return to Ravnica or something, but I remember Origins being released, and I remember how cool the flip Planeswalkers were. And I have to imagine, this is speculation, but I have to imagine if we were running this survey for the same, Cube audience at the time of Origins release, that those flip Planeswalkers would have been in the top 10, all 5 of them, every single one of them. Jace would have been the top 1. They were so exciting. They were some of the most powerful and interesting and cool cards in that set. And I don't know if it's just that these flip Planeswalkers are much less elegantly designed. I kind of think they are. Or if it's that we just are completely burned out and double-sided cards have no more excitement and interest to them, and it's not cool anymore to us. It's not novel anymore, but these are nowhere near as popular. I mean, Tamiyo and Ajani both show up in the top 20 with around 25% of the testers. And then the other ones, I just got to keep scrolling. They're down here somewhere, but just nowhere near as much enthusiasm for these cards as I kind of expected, just because I kind of thought, cheap flip Planeswalkers was a recipe for just a popular card amongst the Magic population more broadly. And that just proved to not be the case.
I think it is worth pointing out, though, that even though Ajani is only being tested by a quarter of the people that responded, it does have the highest rating of any card at 8.6. So the people that are interested in these flipwalkers know what they want. They know they're interested in them. They're very confident. So I think it's just not as broad appeal, but a very specific and strong appeal.
Yeah, Tamiyo also has almost a rating of 8, which rivals anything in the top 10 that we're going to talk about here. So people that want them know they want them, but way fewer people want them than I expected, and I'm kind of glad.
I think it's extremely cool. Yeah.
The number 2 most popular card for cubes from Modern Horizons 3 is Psychic Frog. A blue and a black for a creature frog. It's a 1/2. Whenever Psychic Frog deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, draw a card. Discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Psychic Frog, and exile 3 cards from your graveyard. Psychic Frog gains flying until end of turn. The combination of Lotleth Troll and Psychotog and Shadow Mage Infiltrator, a bunch of little effects that are kind of all stuck together in a way that I think is pretty resonant. This card is definitely, from just talking to people at Boston Cube Party, people love this card, and the fact that it's second on the results here with 42.1% of our testers testing the card and a rank of 7.5 is supported by my anecdotal experience of people just being really excited about Psychic Frog. And to be fair, it is cool. I think that Shadow Mage Infiltrator style cards, or Ophidians if you want to throw them back to the original, where they deal damage to your opponent and draw a card, are kind of an inherently cool card type. And this is the first one that's been really pushed in a very long time. If you're playing cubes anywhere near sort of the peaks of power, I'm not aware of a viable Ophidian-style card that has been something people can actually play for a long time. I think back to, like, Edric, Spymaster of Trest, maybe, is one of the ones that's, like, closest to viable, but Psychic Frog is just so much better than all the competition in that regard, and it definitely plays into this play pattern of, like, protect the queen. If you can just keep the board clear and keep hitting with your Psychic Frog, it'll keep drawing more removal spells, more things to keep the board clear, and you can just kind of take over the game that way, which is, I think, a fun play pattern. I like that kind of committal snowballing where if you work for it, you can snowball a single threat to like carry the whole game, as opposed to just a card taking over completely on its own.
The card also seems extremely powerful. I mean, if you can keep fueling it, like if you discard a card to make it into a 2-mana 2/3, and then if you're able to exile those cards from your graveyard and give it flying, it gives you that card right back. So this card could just do a lot, I think. Also, being a free discard outlet, I think, is going to be relevant, if you're playing a powerful environment that is currently playing, Putrid Imp, which is a card that doesn't really do anything except for discard cards. This is going to be probably very appealing to people playing those kinds of cards.
The combination of the Ophidian ability when it deals damage to your opponent, draw a card, which they also added Planeswalkers too, which a lot of these old cards don't have, which is interesting. That plus the threat of activation of putting a +1/+1 counter on it just means that your opponent's going to have very few good options.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Either I'm just turning a random card in your hand, the worst card in your hand, into a free removal spell for my blocker here if I choose to block because you can just pitch it to make your frog bigger, or I'm letting you draw a card. Like, there's no good options at that point. So the card is definitely very powerful, and we've talked a little bit about the funny wordplay callback to Psychotog, Psychic Frog. It bothers me less, honestly, as time goes on. I think partially because this card is starting to, even in early days, I think have a reputation of its own. And I think there'll be players very shortly that have no idea what Psychotog is, but have a lot of affection for Psychic Frog. Aesthetically, I'm not as bothered by that as I am of by right of the Reliquary or something.
I think you're right on that count. It's an extremely cool card and extremely strong as well. I've actually gotten to play this a little bit. Friend of the show, Deinonychus, and I were doing some 2-player drafts. I was in his neck of the woods, and I discarded 4 cards to Psychic Frog in a single combat just to like grow it enough to, to win the combat or something. I think he called my bluff with a double block or something.
Well, you called his bluff on not having a removal spell. That's what you did.
Yeah, but even in that case, like, I don't know, I guess this is just an anecdote to say, yes, this is a queen worth protecting, and yes, that is really fun when you get to do it, because it leads to this, I don't know, it's kind of like an edge case generator where you sometimes deal with the edge case of like discarding 4 spells to a single card, and you are top decking, but you're also really caring about combat and race, damage race, and yeah, just really fun.
Yeah, it's cool for powerful cards to really care about combat and to reward you for actually getting into the red zone. And the fact that this doesn't do anything until you actually connect with your opponent, aside from be a free discard outlet, is, I think, makes it a compelling power outlier. Have you come around on the frog at all, Anthony? I feel like you were really down on the frog at first.
It's a lot of... it feels just sort of like a hat on a hat to me. There's just too many jokes happening at once.
What if you ignore the jokes and just look at the card mechanically?
I can't ignore the jokes, Andy. Jokes are important. They're very serious.
Okay, well,
What if you look into his little vertical pupil eye and just stare at it for a little bit?
That's also... does he have like a lightning bolt-shaped pupil? No, I guess it's a normal frog pupil.
He's becoming hypnotized. Let's
talk about the number one card in our community survey, Marionette Apprentice. This is 1 and a black for a 1/2 human artificer. It has Fabricate 1, which means when it enters the battlefield, you choose between putting a 1/1 counter on it or creating a 1/1 servo. And whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So we have a combination of a Blood Artist that is also creating fuel for itself and a mini Marionette Master, and it's being tested by almost half, 47% of our respondents, with a very high rating of 7.9.
Parker, you seem to think that it was surprising this was the most popular card. Speak on that.
Well, it is in the same card file as a cycle of free spells and Ocelite Pride and Nethergoyf.
I completely forgot about the free spells. People aren't just playing any of those, I guess?
I guess not.
Damn.
Oh, and also flip Planeswalkers, two of which cost a single mana.
Man, there's just so much, and a whole bunch of like double-faced lands, and
yeah. So I mean, compared to those cards, I thought an uncommon had no chance. Even an uncommon that is admittedly as cool as this one, as mechanically like functional and kind of diverse, and sick art as well. That's kind of, to me, very evocative and kind of points back to the Kaladesh era in a really cool way. Even for all of those things, I thought there was no chance that this would be the most popular card from Modern Horizons 3. And I'd just like to say congratulations, Cube community. You've done it. You've made an uncommon the most popular card from Modern Horizons 3. I'm glad to see it.
So I was not so surprised by this, though, because it does follow a consistent pattern in what cards tend to rise up to the top of these surveys, in that it fits into a clear, established type of gameplay already, a clear strategy of sacrificing stuff and dealing damage. It even has like clear reference points like Blood Artist, and it's cheap in terms of mana cost, and all those things just make it a pretty appealing card for a lot of people.
Yeah, people love their Aristocrats themes, they love their artifact themes, and this sort of touches on both. The first thing I thought when I saw this, honestly, is a local member of our playgroup has recently put together an Invasion Planes Shift. I always get Planes Chase and Planes Shift confused. I'm pretty sure it's Plane Shift.
Plane Shift.
An Invasion Planes Shift Apocalypse Cube. And it's funny, I think his pattern has popped up a couple times in Magic R&D where they do a like vertical cycle. In Invasion Planes Shift Apocalypse, there is the like Nightscape cycle where you have Nightscape Apprentice and Nightscape Master, and they do that for all of the different scapes, Sunscape and all that kind of stuff. And so often when they do that, the Apprentices are just better cards than the Masters, because the Masters are all 4-mana 2/2s that have better activated abilities, but you gotta pay 4 mana and then untap with your 2/2. Meanwhile, the Apprentices all cost like a mana and have these little like trinkety abilities, but they're so often just better cards because of that. Marionette Apprentice, I think, is just a much better card than Marionette Master, and will go in a lot more decks and be more useful broadly. And I think it's a great little elegant piece and a perfect kind of card to get in a Modern Horizons set. So I love to see it at the top, though it is at the top with only 47% of our testers testing it, and a rank of 7.9. A high rank, but not blowing the doors off of the testing percentage for a card at the top of a survey.
Cool. Should we do some honorable mentions?
Yeah, let's talk about what's not here. We've already talked about the Flip Planeswalkers a little bit. I want to give a quick shout out to the Landscape Cycle. These are the 3-color combination fetch lands. They all come into play untapped, tap for a colorless mana, or you can tap and sacrifice them to go get a basic land of one of 3 types. It cannot be a typed non-basic, it has to be a basic land. And then they have cycling for their full colors. So the Jeskai one can go get a plains, island, or mountain, and you can cycle it for white, blue, red. I've played with these in a couple of contexts now, and I think they're great. Just some of the most awesome budget mana fixing options available to cube designers now. They remind me a lot of Ash Barons in that like they might seem superficially to be like an Evolving Wilds, but they are so much better than that. The fact that they can just tap for a colorless untapped is huge, because if you don't need that colored mana the turn you draw it, you're not playing off curve necessarily. They're still just great on turn 1 because you can go get whatever color you need. And I played these in one of the cubes at Boston Cube Party. I think I had 5 in my deck because I was taking them very highly and my opponents were not. And I cycled them a lot. It came up way more than I expected to, and it was really awesome to have that upside on these cards. Really into this cycle, and especially if you are like budget focused, a very cool cycle for mana fixing that also will discourage really greedy mana bases, because you have to have basics of that type to go get for this to be a white source. And when you need basics to turn your non-basic land into a source of that color, it really hampers how much you can just get free splashes. You cannot splash for free. You have to put a plains in your deck to get a white splash off of these cards, which I think is a really healthy and positive play pattern for cube designers specifically.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that in, cubes that are not playing fetch lands and triomes, which enable just these like really greedy, like you say, 5-color mana bases, I think these are actually going to play in the way of being just more potential options for people that are playing 2-color decks.
Extremely cool. Yeah.
It's just awesome to have more shuffle effects and like ways to fuel things like Delve at lower budget and lower power level. I mean, like,
for sure.
I love fetch lands and I love playing them, but they are complicated for new players that don't understand the nuances of the like fetchable mana base, and it's expensive. It's expensive to have a fetch and fetchable mana base, and these just give you so much of that upside at very little cost. So that's my first honorable mention. What's your honorable mention, Parker?
Sure. Well, these are the most tested commons of the set, the landscape cycle. But the most tested common that's a non-land is Accursed Marauder. This is 1 and a black for a 2/1 creature zombie warrior. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a non-token creature. I just want to point this out and say, this card's so sick.
It's
the art
awesome.
rules.
I'm so glad you mentioned it.
The mechanics are cool. I love how it's like, it kind of rounds down to a Diabolic Edict sometimes, but then other times it could be really cool. It can trigger your zombie synergies or your warrior synergies, or you can sacrifice your Gravecrawler to your Accursed Marauder. Yeah, I think this wins the Scrapwork Mutt Award for me, which is an award I just made up, but I need Anthony to play this.
This card also jumped out at me because specifically of my monocolored starter deck project, which the black deck in that project does play currently 4 copies of Fleshbag Marauder. And Fleshbag Marauder is a great example of a card that does its thing, but I think Magic has changed around that card in a way that it doesn't really function the way it did when it was printed. Namely, there are so many more tokens now, and also just the rate is not that competitive anymore. It's a 3-mana, 3/1 that makes you sacrifice something, and I cannot wait to swap all those out for Accursed Marauders, which will do exactly the same thing in a more efficient way, and actually give the black deck a better answer to Murmuring Mystic, which right now the Fleshbag Marauders are laughably bad against Murmuring Mystic in the blue-black matchup, so I'm thrilled about this addition to those decks specifically, and it is so clean, and also rated pretty highly. It is like being played by basically as many people as are playing Ocelot Pride, which is so cool to me. The last thing I want to take note of here, we've touched on it a couple of times, but I think what is missing from this top cards in the set is more notable than what's there necessarily. Nadu, nowhere to be seen. I think I counted and it's like the 26th most popular card in the set. I expect that to change over time if this card continues to be really powerful, because I think people tend to be drawn to cards that are powerful if they like playing them in Constructed, and then maybe it gets banned. They can then go play it in Cube. But people not that high on Nadu. A card like Birthing Ritual is right below Nadu, which is a really powerful card that I expected to turn up more highly, but didn't. We mentioned Ocelot Pride being down here, the Flip Planeswalkers. This is so far from a list of like the most exciting and powerful cards from the set, and instead I think is really a pretty concise list of the cards that people are really excited about the play patterns of, and that are going to fit into a wide variety of designs, which has been the goal of these surveys forever since we've been doing them, but I think in the early days was maybe not as much borne out, as we were still dealing with an audience that was primarily designing power-focused cubes, and I think it's just not a thing as much anymore, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, it really shows a lot of foresight on the creators of the set survey structure, including Jet, Crowdus, and Anthony. It's really cool to see this development over time.
Yeah, absolutely. One other card that is a little bit lower than I would expect is Cranial Ram, which is only being tested by 14% of the respondents. This is black-red for a living weapon, so it comes with a 0/0 germ token. Equipped creature gets +X+1, where X is the number of artifacts you control, and has equip 2. This is, again, one of these cards that I think fits that same kind of pattern that I expect to be, representative of the top cards, where it's sort of a known quantity, but is a cheap card in terms of mana cost, and fits into established archetypes. Like, this is another cranial plating that also is just a little bit more efficient, and this was also day 0 banned from Pauper. So I'm a little bit surprised to see this so low, but maybe there's some factor that's influencing that.
I don't think cranial plating is a particularly popular cube card.
Maybe that's
for
the problem,
starters.
I just get excited when I see that card.
Yeah, it's a cool card, but you need to be pretty committed, not just to an artifact deck, but to like an artifact aggro deck, and I think it just doesn't have as many homes as you might be expecting.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Would this be allowed in the Ornithopter cube, or is that 0/0 creature token is not allowed?
No chance.
Perfect. Just wanted to make sure.
Is that the end of our set review, folks?
Well, before we end, I want to point out that you can read the set review for yourself at luckypaper.co. You can read a similar article for Modern Horizons 3 Commander, which we didn't touch on. And finally, Usman Jamil has joined us once again for a cube commentary on his set survey response for Modern Horizons 3. And so you can read his in-depth evaluations of the cards that he finds exciting. It's a really nice opportunity if this is one of your first surveys, you can see how a veteran cube curator thinks about these cards.
All those links will be in the show notes. And also, Anthony, I'm going to do it. I'm going to say that by the time this episode comes out, we're going to have the new podcast views on the website done.
All right.
We're very
holding
close.
Ourselves accountable.
We're very close. We're going to force ourselves to get these last couple things done this weekend.
Enjoy the beautiful new pages. Importantly, you'll now be able to, on the website, view the cards mentioned page while the podcast is playing. So if you are somebody that listens on the website, that should hopefully be a little bit better for you.
Yep, don't have to open 2 new tabs anymore, and also just cleaned all that up and made it a little bit better. And we have more coming on that front, too. More things we've been working on that are close to being done to take advantage of all of the great annotations we have over time for all the episodes of the show. So stay tuned for that. One last thing to mention here, Anthony and I were guests on another podcast called 10,000 Posts. The episode which we are on is going to come out tomorrow, the day this episode comes out, which will be Tuesday, the 9th of July. This podcast comes out on my birthday. Everyone say happy birthday to me.
Happy birthday, Andy.
Happy birthday.
On Tuesday the 9th, the episode with Anthony is going to come out. We are talking about magic. Basically, this is a podcast that is about the art of posting and the weird perverted corners of the internet. And we were invited on to talk about magic with the host, who is magic curious, but not magic invested. So some of that stuff will be, I think, things that our listeners will already know, will be a little bit repetitive. But we also spent a lot of time talking about some of the, gripes we have with how the game is managed that we don't talk about a lot on this show, because this is a show about what we like about Magic. So if you want more of that, tune in to 10,000 Posts on July 9th and hear Anthony and I talk about that.
Yeah, it was a fun conversation, especially to take a step back and not just focus really, really deep in the weeds as we do on this show, and just talk about Magic more broadly.
Yeah, it was really, the host at one point was like, is there like a strategy for like how to make a deck that has like a right combination of cards? And we're like, buddy, is there?
Every question that he asked, we were just like, oh wow, we could do 3 episodes on that question.
We've been going for 31 years. For 31 years, we've been trying to answer the question of how should your deck be constructed. So yeah, a lot to unpack there. All right, that's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. The podcast is produced by thinking really hard about Magic cards and then speaking into microphones about it. Anthony and Parker, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for the gift of Cube, Andy.
Thank you for the gift of friendship.
How long do I have to credit Zach Barish with that before that can be the outro to the podcast?
Forever.
I'm sure he'll let me have it if I ask him nicely.
That's the thing about being friends. You give people your catchphrases.
Thank you for the gift of catchphrase.
Also, a little bit of credit to Patrick for, calling it out.